Hey, Paul, it's Ryan from 2minutetennis.net. Hey, thank you so much for the opportunity to do this video stroke analysis lesson for you on your forehand. So before we get into the areas for improvement, I want to show you two things that I really like about your forehand. The first being when you take it back. So when you take the racket back, you take it back initially with both hands. You can see that on every forehand. You turn and watch how your right hand stays on the throat of the racket initially. I love that. You turn, it helps you to coil the body. Sure, we could do it a little bit more, and I'll talk to you about that in a second here, but I love that you initiate the take back with the right hand still on the throat. That's awesome. The second thing that I really like is how you close your racket face, or that your racket face is closed prior to hitting the ball. This is critical for being able to swing up and through contact and be able to get the top spin that you're looking for. So no matter what you change from this point forward about your forehand, don't lose those two things. Make sure that you initiate the take back with both hands on, and that you make sure that prior to contact that your strings are closed. All right, Paul, here are your areas for improvement when it comes to your forehand. Got 5 of them here. Number 1, your late prep. Just like on the backhand, you are preparing late on the forehand. I'm going to describe a drill that you can use to, especially because you have a ball machine, which will be perfect for this. I'm going to describe a drill that will eliminate this on the forehand once and for all. You could even do this drill on the backhand as well, because I know this was an issue on your backhand, so I'll explain that. Number 2, your left arm is straightening towards the back fence. So when you turn with both hands, it's almost like you're shoving someone back away behind you with your left arm. And we don't want to make that move. There's no need to make that move. And what it ends up doing is just making your swing, especially because you're already taking it back late. This just makes it even later for you to get to contact, which makes you have to stand so far back behind the baseline and move away from the ball. It takes a lot of time to get to contact, so I'll explain that. Number 3, you have a wrist flexion where, I don't know, you can probably feel it. You probably feel a wristiness to your forehand, which I'm going to ask you to not do. You were talking about how your forehand is not as consistent as your backhand. So this is one of the reasons why. It's because you will see yourself, when I show you, your wrist straightening, which is wrist flexion, and then having to reset the wrist again. And it just sets in motion a lot of wristiness. And you'll see some pros, it's called a lag or a pre-stretch forearm forehand. There are pros who use this technique. But to be honest, when I see recreational players use this, they rarely hit their best forehands. So I'm going to ask you to not use wrist flexion after you straighten your left arm. And again, I'll show you all this with your swing versus the pros. Number 4, at contact, you have a low right hand. So as you're striking the ball, we actually want quite a high right hand as we're striking the ball. It almost should look like we're waving to someone as we hit, and you don't have that look. So I'm going to show you why you want it. And one of the reasons actually is the last thing here. You have a low finish. You finish typically down by your right pocket, and I'm going to ask you to finish up high over your right ear. And actually having number 4 be correct helps number 5 to be correct. So, all right, let's get started. All right, Paul, so late preparation. I've got you next to Nadal here. And here's a ball coming out or off of Alcaraz's strings, so right there. And we're going to put a timer down, and we're going to see how long it takes for Nadal to prepare his racket. So let's see. So right there, right? I would say like that, like right about there, he is absolutely prepared, right? 0.66 seconds. So you know it's going to be a forehand. See, against Alcaraz, Nadal didn't know if it was going to be a cross court or down the line forehand. So he really had to kind of wait to see. Okay. Now let's take it to the point the ball comes right out of the ball machine. So let's zoom in. Ball shooting out of the ball machine. So right about there. So you know it's coming out. Okay. So let's put a timer down. And now let's see where your racket is at 0.66 seconds. So at the same amount of time, you have not moved your racket. Okay? Let's keep going. And then right there, I would say it's the equivalent. 1.46 seconds. It is taking you twice as long to get your racket back. Now, let me play devil's advocate because I'm sure you're already thinking it. If we go to the point at 0.66 seconds, look where Alcaraz's ball is. It's already basically bouncing. That's how fast he's hitting this ball, right? He hits the ball, and then in 0.66 seconds, the ball is basically bouncing, 0.68, all right? In 0.66 seconds for you, the ball hasn't even really crossed the net yet, okay? Now, one could argue, well, Ryan, he's waiting because he doesn't have to take his racket back so early because the ball machine isn't coming off the opponent's racket. I'm sorry, the ball machine isn't shooting the ball as hard as when Alcaraz is hitting the ball. And on the surface, that makes sense. The problem is your racket preparation, the lateness of your racket preparation, Paul, would not be able to handle Alcaraz. But Nadal can handle the ball machine. My point being is, through 26 years of coaching, you learn the mistakes that players make very early on in their tennis when they're a beginner. That seeps in and stays and is residual all the way through their development. And one of the mistakes I see all the time beginners make that stays way too long is beginners will use the bounce to tell them when to start swinging. And if you want your level of play to go up, you have to be able to handle harder hits, which means there's less time after the bounce. Let's see how much time there is after the bounce. So there's the bounce right there. We'll put a timer down, and let's see how long it takes for him to hit this ball. So he's hitting the ball right now, 0.46 seconds. Let's see how much time after the bounce for you. So there's the bounce. Let's see how long until you hit. So, right, so a little less than twice as long, right? So almost twice as long, but we'll say maybe 80% longer. So the idea is simple. If you're the type of person who is waiting for the ball to bounce, and you can see that, like the ball's coming, and you're still not moving the racket. You're not moving the racket. It's not like you're getting it back early and it's just you're waiting behind you. You're waiting in front of you, waiting. Then as the ball bounces, then you start taking the racket back. Nadal can handle the ball machine. You are not able to handle Alcaraz. And who can, right? Who can handle Alcaraz? Not many players in the world can. But you understand my point. There is a player at your tennis club who is the equivalent of Alcaraz for you. And so the first thing you have to do is you have to learn to get the racket back early. One of the things you want to do is very early on, show your back to your opponent. So you can see like this person right here is able to see Nadal's back. You have to think of how quickly can you show your back to the ball machine. Now, one drill that you can do is I actually want you, Paul, to stand up on the service line. So this is you on the service line. Here are your feet standing on the service line. I want the ball to shoot out to you, and I want you to hit forehands out of the air. The reason is the best way to learn to ignore the bounce is to actually have no bounce. I want you to swing and hit the ball out of the air as a drill to train your body that you don't need the bounce to tell you when to swing, that you can use other pieces of information. So that's the drill I want you to do. You can do it on your backhand as well to practice that. It's just not as common on the backhand to even hit that shot because that's a useful shot when playing. I remember Agassi in the 80s used to hit that shot all the time, that out of the air. Coco Gauff does it now, that swinging forehand. So practice hitting from the service line, ground strokes out of the air. It'll take away the bounce, which means you can no longer use the bounce to gain the information of when to swing and when to contact. And that's how you want your swing to actually be. When Nadal is hitting this forehand, the bounce doesn't mean anything to him. Because remember, sometimes the bounce lands in the box, sometimes it lands on the baseline. Like you can't use the bounce as a reliable piece of information, but I'm watching you hit and you can very much tell you wait around the time the ball's going to bounce, then you prepare the racket. And that really hurts your ability to handle shots that land super deep. So stand on the service line, take ground strokes out of the air, eliminate the bounce. And you will start using other pieces of information, not the bounce, to tell you when to swing and when to contact. That is the absolute foolproof way to get rid of your late prep on your forehand. Now, Paul, the second idea has to do with you straightening your left arm toward the back fence before you drop the racket. So I've got you and Nadal in a very similar place in your swing. Now, I want you to watch what Nadal does. Watch his racket and hand just go down from where they were. You can see that his arm is bent. You can see that your arm is bent. Watch how from here, the racket just goes like this. The racket just goes down from that point. From this point right here, we should see the same thing. We should see your racket just go down. But watch what your racket does. Your racket goes back, and it looks like you're trying to touch the curtain behind you. Your arm goes perfectly straight. So your arm is bent, then perfectly straight. When your racket, the top of your racket is at nose level, the tip of your racket at nose level, your arm is straight. You'll see with Nadal, his is bent, and from this point right here, it just goes down. When you take your racket back to right here, you should just go down. Your racket, or I should say your left arm, straightening and the racket going back toward the back curtain is adding time to the swing without adding a benefit. You're adding time in how long it takes for you to get to the contact, but there's no benefit to stretching your arm out. This is going to make you late, especially when players hit the ball very hard and deep to you, especially because of your late preparation. So it's kind of like leaving your house late for work, but you take the long way to work. It's like those two things don't match. You're late. You're leaving your house late. You're leaving your ready position late. You're taking your racket back late, but then you take the long way to get to the ball. And so those two just do not work well with each other. So what you're going to have to do is from this point right here, and you can see Nadal, his racket just goes down. He does not look like he's trying to touch the curtain behind him. Do not stretch your arm like that where you just reach back. It is as simple as from this point right here, you just take the racket down. This is going to shorten the swing. It means that you don't have to be so fast in dropping it. You can just take because it's a shorter swing. So you can just drop and take your time and then go rather than having to reach all the way back and then quickly swing. You might feel exactly what I'm saying right now. You might even in your mind's eye just go, I can feel it. I can see it. I know I'm reaching back like that. Once you take the racket back from right there, once the racket goes back, it just goes down toward the ground and then to the ball. I don't want you reaching back, lengthening the swing without any benefit. Here's a good view of it from the back. And since we've seen it from the side, we can put those two pieces of information together, the back and side view, and really see. Look how his racket just goes down. And when his arm is straight, and you don't have to, by the way, you don't have to have your arm straight. That's why I didn't tell you straighten the elbow down. You can have a bent arm, you can have a straight arm when you contact the ball. Djokovic has a slightly bent arm. Nadal has a straight arm. Both are correct. It's personal preference. It's like a two-hander and one-hander on the backhand. Personal preference, one is not better than the other. It's what's better for you. But you'll notice you straighten your arm back. It's like you're handing your racket to the camera. Where with Nadal, it never looks like he's handing the racket to the camera. He's just taking his racket down. So once you turn, and it's really this point right here, both of you are in a very similar place. We should just see your racket go down. Nadal's racket just goes down from that point. Your racket reaches back toward the camera. It lengthens the swing without any benefit. All right, number 3, Paul, wrist flexion. I want you to look when you straighten your arm and you push it back, how the angle between your forearm and racket lessens. So you have right now your forearm at this angle and your racket at that angle. Let's actually, let's find out what angle that is. Let me go like this. So there we go. Okay, 110 degrees between your forearm and racket, or somewhat, right? Well, when you take your racket back, you lose that angle. Now, 160. You're losing 50 degrees of wrist angle. Now, you have to get that wrist angle back. So watch what ends up happening. You then find it again. Now, this isn't going to be an exact angle, but you understand what I mean. Now you're closer back to where you were before. Here your wrist is cocked up, and so you have a bit of a cocked wrist. Then you straighten the wrist, and then you cock the wrist again. This produces a lot of wristiness as you're hitting the ball. There's a lot of play in the wrist, and you'll hear players talk about the lag and a pre-stretch, and that's all well and good when it comes to pro players. But I'm going to suggest that you have less wrist movement on your forehand. Here's my forehand, and I want you to notice as the racket's dropping, the angle between my arm and my racket stays more intact. See how there's always wrist angle, or always an angle between my racket and my forearm? I'm not straightening it the way you are and then finding the angle again. I'm dropping my racket down. You can see, and I have a slightly bent arm when I strike the ball. This is how I feel best hitting. That's just like Joker. And you have a slightly bent arm too as you're contacting. But I'm sorry, not he. I was going to say Djokovic. When I'm hitting the ball, though, I'm not using a lot of wrist. It's one of the reasons why I feel super consistent with my forehand. Now, you'll watch videos on YouTube, you'll hear commentators, and they'll say, oh, he used a lot of wrist when he was hitting that ball. First off, how valid that statement is, it's not as easy to know how much wrist was being used while someone was striking the ball. But here's what I will say. The more wristiness you feel, the less consistent you're going to be. I feel very little wrist in my forehand, so I feel very confident that my forehand's going to go in. What good is hitting the ball hard if you don't feel like you can be consistent with it? So the key here is, we talked about Nadal and when he dropped the racket without pushing it back. I want you to drop the racket, but feel as you're dropping and as you're swinging to contact that you really do have not a rigid wrist, not that you're squeezing tightly, but I just want you to feel like the angle between the forearm and racket, as you drop it, it stays intact. And you can see that. You can see my angle is intact. From here to there to there, it's like all the same angle, where yours is very obvious that I think it was like 160, the angle between, and then you go back to the same, like the two of us are the same at contact. The angle between our forearm and racket, it's the same, or within a few degrees. It's great. You have exactly what you should have, but you're having to find that angle rather than just keeping that angle. So I want you to use less wrist by not using wrist flexion, which then requires wrist extension to then lay it back again and hopefully try to find the angle that's going to work best for you. Drop the racket where the wrist just kind of stays in its position from the drop to the contact, and built into that will be more consistency. Paul, number 5. You have a low right hand at contact. Here's a left-handed Djokovic, and I want you to look at contact where his left hand is versus yours. Did I say left hand? I meant to say right hand. His right hand is up, visible over his right shoulder. Yours, you can see where it is. It's not up here, but it's low. Now you might think, well, what does that matter? Well, the hand, the movement of the hand is vital. The right hand is vital for uncoiling. So let's just look at his right hand in the way it moves. His right hand is here, and it moves like this. And by the time he contacts the ball, it's here. So you can see the way it moves. So if we put yours here, right, we should circle your right hand, and we should see your hand go like this and be here, which is the same movement Djokovic had. Across and then across, right? He's reaching across with his right hand, then he moves it across as he's hitting, waving to the opponent as he strikes the ball. Watch what your hand does. So it goes way down and then doesn't quite get up to here. Now, why does that matter? It matters for a couple reasons. First is it's not the best way to ensure that you are able to turn your hips properly on the forehand. Sometimes when you hit the ball, you don't quite rotate the hips and the shoulders enough. And you can see great shoulder and hip turn from Djokovic. When you hit, you don't quite get the hip, especially as you're hitting the ball. It's almost like you're pulling your arm through. Like, I should say pushing, my fault. You're pushing your left arm through rather than rotating the body and letting the left arm get pulled through. What I want you to do is I almost want you to feel like you are in the shallow end of a pool. So let's draw that. Here's the water, and I'm going to do it for Djokovic too. There's the water. And in fact, we can kind of, right? So you're in the shallow end of a pool, and it's basically just above your belly button, right? So hit a wrong button. So I had to redraw everything. So you're in the shallow end of a pool. Djokovic is in the shallow end of a pool. I want you to watch how Djokovic's right hand would never get wet. Now his racket gets wet, but look at his right hand. Throughout the entire stroke, his right hand is always dry. His right hand is staying out of the water. This wouldn't be the worst thing in the world for you to practice if you have a pool near you or you have access to something like that. You have to think of it as the pool is at belly button or even chest height, and you're going to move your arm up and across, keeping it dry. Watch your right hand. It gets dunked down in the water and then comes out of the water. I want it to stay up for two main reasons. The first being is what Djokovic does by moving it across like this helps ensure hip rotation. By allowing your your right hand to drop, and you can see that it goes down and then back up again, it can make it it can impede your hip turn and make your hip turn and shoulder turn late. But there's another reason. You tend to finish low. You tend to finish down here. You'll finish below shoulder level. And it's for a very simple reason to understand. It's because the racket tends to find your right hand. When you have a lower right hand, you will swing low. So you end up swinging across and you get side spin. I want you to finish really high. Let me show you what this looks like. So here I am at contact. By the way, if we were standing behind me on this side, you could see my left hand over my shoulder, which is what you see right there, right? You can see my left hand in there, right? As I'm uncoiling. But I want you to look at my finish. Look how high I'm finishing. I am catching the racket higher than for me as a righty, my left ear. So for you, it's going to be higher than your right ear. Look how high I'm going. I want you to swing up more and really go up and not be so across with your swing. To that end, one of the ways to entice a player to swing up more is to have a higher non-hitting hand. When you have a higher non-hitting hand, since anatomically, it's just the way it works. Our arms tend to find each other. If your non-hitting hand is high, the way mine is, then what ends up happening is your racket is willing to go up there, because then you can catch the racket high up over your shoulder. Waving to the opponent and catching high will do two incredibly important things. Make sure that you are turning your hips and shoulders properly on the forehand, and that your hand isn't getting wet in the pool, but it's actually just moving across and staying up. But what it'll also do is entice your racket to swing up more. That way you get better topspin, you lift the ball, you get higher net clearance, you can hit the ball deeper, especially in singles. That's super important. You can close the racket face off a little bit more and still swing up like Nadal and get the ball to dip low to someone at the net in doubles. No matter how you play or what you play, you'll be able to handle it. But I want you to catch the racket really high up over your right ear as a lefty to greatly improve actually the quality of the shot by actually improving the quality of the finish. And here's a great view of Venus Williams. Look how high she's catching. Look at that. This is the idea. Now, again, you're a lefty, so the arms would be over here, right? Because you're a lefty, so it's over your right ear. And as a righty, she's over her left ear. But that's how high I want you to finish. If she wanted to, she could take a peek through her arms. I know she's looking over her right shoulder. For you, it would be looking over your left shoulder when you're done. But don't be afraid to almost finish so high like Nadal that you're actually looking through your arms. That is going to help you drastically hit the sweet spot more often, get more depth in your shot, not hit the net so often. I can't wait to see how these tips help you. All right, Paul, so here are your forehand solutions. Number one, I want you to practice hitting forehands out of the air. Stand on the service line and just practice hitting out of the air. The reason for this is so that you train yourself that the bounce doesn't mean anything, so much so that there's going to be no bounce. Paul, the bounce on a ground stroke is like the sunrise. It happens every time, every day, right? Bounce happens on every ground stroke. The sun rises every day. But we don't base anything we do on the sunrise. Like, I don't know what time the sun rose this morning. No clue, because it didn't matter to me. I had to get my kids up for school. I had to prepare for my lessons today. Like, I wasn't like, hey, what time is, I wasn't checking what time the sun rose so that I could like wait till the sun rose so I could finally get out of bed. If someone waits for the ball to bounce and then they start moving and acting, that's the same as waiting for the sun to rise. And you're going to be late for that early morning flight. I'll tell you that. So it's the same idea. Take the ball out of the air, and you can practice this with the backhand as well. But it's more common on the forehand because this is just a shot that you hit. But practice it on the backhand as well, just to teach yourself that the bounce doesn't mean anything, because there's going to be no bounce. You got to use other things to tell you when to swing. Number two, drop the racket from a bent arm position. Nadal turned with a bent arm. You turned with a bent arm. But then he dropped from that bent arm position. You straightened it like you're shoving someone behind you, and then you dropped. That takes too long. It's quicker to just, once you turn with the bent arm, just drop and swing. Whether the arm straightens fully or it stays slightly bent is of no matter. You will do what is most comfortable. Most likely, you'll keep it slightly bent. Why? Because you contact with a slightly bent arm, which is great, which is what I do, which is what Djokovic does. But not pushing the arm back like you're pushing someone behind you is going to save you time, because that's adding an extra movement when you could be killing two birds with one stone with just dropping and going to the ball rather than pushing back and then dropping. So yeah, definitely that's going to be a huge improvement, especially when somebody hits the ball very fast to you. Number three, keep your wrist laid back more. Right now, you really use that wrist flexion to straighten out your racket and your arm. I think it was like 160 degrees or something, very close to a literal straight line at 180. And you started, I believe, at 110. So that's a 50-degree angle that then you had to find back again. I want you to use less wrist. I want you to feel like your wrist is staying more fixed. Less wrist movement doesn't mean no wrist movement. But if you think of using less wrist movement, that as you drop the racket, your wrist feels more like it's intact. That angle from the initial turn, less wrist means more consistency. Number four, I want you to keep your right hand dry as it moves across. Think about that arrow that I drew for Djokovic, from the yellow circle to the yellow circle with that blue arrow. As it moves across, keep it out of the water. Keep it dry. Don't drop it. That can impede hip turn in different situations, which I won't get into, but like moving backward or moving to your left, like on the run. It's very common that players hug themselves and they feel like they're in a straitjacket and they can't turn their hips. It's all about keeping that hand up as you hit, as you rotate, which does not impede hip turn. It actually facilitates shoulder and hip turn. And the idea is that at contact, you'll kind of feel like you're waving. And from the back view, you'll see your right hand visible over your right shoulder. And then last, with that hand up there, I want you to catch the racket high. I don't want you swinging across. I want you swinging up like Venus, like myself, like Dominic Thiem. I want you going up as you hit the ball and staying going up. I don't want you to swing across too early, and having that low hand promotes swinging across because anatomically our left hand is going to try to find our right hand. So if you have a high right hand, you're going to swing up, and tennis is a lifting sport. It is a low to high sport. So if your hand is up, it kind of does two things. It makes sure that you uncoil properly. It also ensures that you swing up more. And by the way, when you go catch the racket in your right hand, hold it up there. Hold the racket high. On a ball machine, practice holding your finish until the ball bounces. I have students who practice this, and they don't move their racket until the ball hits the back fence when they are practicing this. It's no different than when you're shooting a basketball to practice the wrist movement, like you're reaching up and putting your hand in a cookie jar. You just hold the finish, and you'll see players do that on the free throw line. They'll shoot the basketball and just hold until the ball goes in or hits the rim. That's the feeling I want you to have. I want you to hit and hold the finish. Of course, you can't do that when you're actually playing, but it's just a drill. It's to ingrain that high finish into your swing. So, Paul, thank you so much for the opportunity to give you my thoughts on how you can improve your forehand. Go through these ideas one at a time. If you think of each idea lasting a week or two, right? With 5 ideas, it should take you 5 to 10 weeks, right? It'll take you somewhere from a little over a month to almost 3 months to get through these ideas. If you think of, I'm going to get all of this by next Tuesday, it'll never work. It won't. The slower you go through the learning process, the faster you're going to get to where you want to be. You work on these ideas, and there's no doubt you're going to gain confidence, win more matches, and play much better tennis. This is Ryan Reedy from 2minutetennis.net. Paul, you got this.